All right. Well, hello and welcome everybody, and welcome to tonight's CLAB panel. I think we have a great one for you, mainly because I've known most of the people on this panel for about 2+ years, and they've been an integral part of a group that has helped make my career. Listen, we have a phenomenal panel for you tonight. I want to get and kind of introduce the folks on it tonight. It's going to be Eric Stevens, David Rahn, Stephanie Kronen from Curaleaf, Vijay Choksi from Fox Rothschild, Amanda Barton from Mr. Cannabis Law, Afaneh from BioTrack, Peyton Pipes from the University of Miami Law School and the founder of the Cannabis Law Society, and then Duree Ross, who's the president of Duree and Duree Ross and Company. So, and then obviously Eric's from Florida for Care, and David Rahn is with CannGen Insurance Services. These are deep experts in the cannabis industry, especially in the state of Florida. So I'm very excited for this panel tonight, and I'm glad that everybody is here to join us. A little housekeeping before we get started. I'm sorry to keep looking at my phone, but I wasn't diligent enough to write any of this down. Join us for our next panel on December 2nd, which will talk about the Black Farmers License. For that panel, we have Eric Range, Sean Coyle, and Vijay will be joining us again. Vijay, like, you got to learn how to say no to Rob, man. Like, you don't have to do every panel. You're like the Peyton Manning of CLAB. You're just in everything. So, but it's going to be another great panel. I know that we have our Christmas party coming up. I think that's going to be December 7th. And then what I'm really excited for, and I'm glad that Rob got the scheduling wrong, December 4th through the 4th and 5th in Miami, we will have the annual CLAB conference. Like I said, the 2019 one was one of the best events I ever went to. It helped start and make my career. I'm very excited for it to be a full-on conference again, for it to be at a true hotel and conference venue. I think we're doing it a little bit different, a little bit better, and it's going to have a very nice national appeal to it with, the typical Florida focus. So with that being said, let me bring in your co-moderators for tonight, because we have such a big, wild panel. We need two people to keep it under control. I will now turn this over to Amanda Barton and Eric Stevens. You two, take it away. I'm going to bed.
Thanks so much, Todd. Welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you for a wonderful panel this evening. We're talking about 2021, a year in review, where we'll be touching on all the exciting things that have happened on a national and state level in the cannabis industry, and also maybe some predictions for what's to come in the future. So I'll pass it off first to Eric Stevens. Eric, what's going on with you at Florida for Care?
Hey, yeah, well, thank you, Todd, and thanks, Amanda, for everything you guys have been doing. Obviously, it's been a long year. It's been a little bit different this year, but once again, things have continued to move forward. So, do you want me to start with Florida for Care stuff? Do you want me to go down through the list? How do you want to run through this, Amanda?
Sure. I mean, if you just want to kind of give an update on what you're doing with Florida for Care and what you're seeing within the state of Florida, and then maybe we'll look on a bigger national level and pass it off to Vijay, and he can talk on kind of what's going on more of the national level with some of the states that are coming online.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So listen, there's been a variety of bills that have been filed. So there's kind of been two legislative sessions. One happened earlier this year in March. There was a THC cap bill that died, but it got a lot of steam, and there wasn't a lot of information against it. And so there's been a group of doctors that have been working, really just volunteer group put together, just kind of working to put some information research together to help be prepared ahead of some of that, and just to kind of give some suggestions of things that they've seen either work or not work. Especially, we saw a lot of good things with the emergency orders. Be it in, essential business designations or just the ability for there to be curbside or telehealth for recertifications, and some of that's gone away. And so I think, some of those issues, in addition to some of the things like reciprocity for some out-of-state patients, some better protections, whether it's in a healthcare facility or in your job, if you're not impaired, some of the things like that are having a little bit better steam. Listen, there's been Republicans and Democrats that have filed bills on any and all of the things that I've just discussed right there. This session, there's been a lot of discussions on what's going to be happening with these different cannabinoids that people are seeing in different places that aren't really labeled, et cetera. And so there's kind of a variety of things that are coming to a cusp here, but there's basically one committee week left. It's the last start of the last week of November and first week of December. And then there's a 60-day legislative session from January to March. And that's basically all the time where things could go good, bad, or nowhere, realistically. And, there's a lot of different rules and factors that could weigh in on that, but there's going to be a bunch of doctors up in Tallahassee on December 1st. And hopefully there'll be some good discussions between that day and the day before. So if there's anybody who's going to be up there, wants to, or knows some doctors who might, feel free to reach out and let me know. But there's been a lot of great things happening. We got over 650,000 patients in the state at this point. There's just so many different products. We finally got edibles. We finally got some other new products that have been coming in. There were some new rules that have come out as far as packaging and labeling that have been a little bit troublesome, I think, for a lot of folks. And so that may need to be revisited in some capacity as well. So, but yeah, those are some of the things that I think could relate to this, and probably a lot of the topics that come up tonight. Some are things already happening, some are happening in other states, and really, I think the other state things are interesting because those are the places that a lot of these legislators are looking in some capacity, at least for some ideas of where to go on some of this stuff, or what's been going on in other places, so that they're not fully reinventing the wheel. So yeah, Vijay, do you want to talk about either anything I left out on the state level, or?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for that update for Florida. I think, one thing that's interesting that Florida did, you mentioned like Florida looking at other states. One thing they did look at with other states is the introduction of hydrocarbon, right? So what that's going to do is they made their much anticipated hydrocarbon rule. So now you can have butane, heptane, all those hydrocarbon extract products available for the Florida market. Prior to that rule, it was really just ethanol and hydrocarbon, or excuse me, ethanol and CO2 that were utilized by MMTCs to make products. But just expanding outside the scope of Florida, we're looking at a lot of states that made some movement this year. Some notable states include California, for instance. California is kind of a cluster, right? It's kind of saturated, and quite honestly, it's very difficult to make an honest buck. That's why we're not seeing a lot of MSOs get into California. But to that respect, what they did do that was interesting is they passed a new hemp bill, Assembly Bill 45. And what that did is it opened the door for hemp, CBD, to be introduced to like food and beverages and dietary supplements. So that's going to be a big boom for that market out in the West Coast. And then kind of just moving your way towards East, I see a big development happening in Texas. Texas, relatively speaking, is a small state. It's not Florida, it's not California, it's a medical state, and it has a very low population in terms of patients. It's only about 13,000 patients that are eligible to purchase medical marijuana. But what they did that was interesting is over this past month, they had their largest increase in patient count. Over 2,000 were added in October from September, thus bringing it to 13,000. That's really small comparatively speaking, but there is no other state in the United States like Texas. That's a green opportunity for a lot of companies. And quite honestly, they started giving out licenses in 2017, and they only have 3. And they're the same 3 that exist today. So I think that's kind of interesting, a new market just to keep an eye on. But moving over to the East Coast, we have states like New York, but most notably something like New Jersey, where they actually introduced their notice of application for adult use, their adult use program. And what New Jersey did, and Amanda and Peyton and Stephanie, anyone who wants to chime in, they really emphasize on 2 things: equity and municipalities. In New Jersey, municipalities have a lot of control, so much so that they actually could pick a preference in terms of licensees. They can restrict what type of operations are within their certain jurisdictions. But they also gave forth a preference in terms of equity, right? So like if you are a social equity applicant, you would be able to receive a preference. If you live in an impact zone, a socially disadvantaged area, you would receive a preference. If you're economically disadvantaged in terms of tax income, then you would receive a preference. If you're a micro business, you would receive a preference. So I think that's very interesting. And New Jersey did really go far in terms of their social equity. So that was kind of interesting.
One thing I'll
Yes.
pile onto that, Vijay, is that the micro license applications actually get a preference across all spectrum. So even across the various different breakdowns of equity, et cetera. I really appreciated the focus on the micro licenses and allowing the little guy to kind of get into the industry. I think that was a really good move on the New Jersey part. So
yeah, it's almost like a micro business would be a step into that market, where you would be able to enter as a micro business and then later convert to an annual license business. So it really gives an opportunity for people who are cash strapped. So that's cool.
Another cool thing that they did is on the conditional. So they actually have a whole separate license class that's called a conditional license. And so that allows you to apply for a license without having necessarily the real estate already secured, without necessarily having all the elements to a full application that you might need. And what we're seeing is they've recently come out, I believe in the last week or two, with more of their requirements as far as their actual application process. And it's like you mentioned, Vijay, it's very much where they're going to first look at, they put a list of priorities. And the first one is social equity conditional applicants, then it's the diversity applicants, then it's the the impact zone applicants for conditional licenses. So it is very interesting how they structured it. I haven't really seen another state take on an approach like New Jersey has. It'll be interesting also to see what New York does in light of what New Jersey does, because New York has passed adult use, but it hasn't put forth their application requirements yet. So it should be very interesting to see what New York does in light of what New Jersey, how New Jersey has handled the regulations. And we forgot to mention, we just kind of jumped right into the nitty gritty. I like to get right to it. But if the audience ever has any questions, we will have a Q&A session at the end, but don't worry about forgetting your question. There is a Q&A down at the bottom of your screen that you can drop any questions in. We'll try to answer them in real time. And if not, we'll address them at the end of the webinar. So feel free to use the Q&A or the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And panelists, feel free to jump in if you have anything to contribute to anything that any of the other panelists are weighing in on. But also, Vijay, talk a little bit about in Florida. We didn't really hit on this. There were some exciting developments actually in Florida itself with the Flora-grown decision being decided, and actually the Florida Department of Health is going to be issuing some new licenses, it sounds like, in the next year. And I know you'll be doing a panel next month on the Pickford applicant license. Do you just want to give a little preview about what you'll be talking about next month?
Yeah, for sure. So, I encourage everyone to kind of tune in on December 2nd. We're really going to dive deep into Florida's release of the Pickford and Black Farmers license application and instructions, what applicants need to do to get their ducks in a row, to position themselves to be a competitive applicant. This is going to be a competitive process. There's not a lot of class members pursuant to those class litigation suits of Pickford and in Ray Black Farmers, but they do exist. And if you'd like to apply, if you'd like to learn more about it, then I encourage you to kind of attend that. And that kind of paved the way. It's actually been 4 years in the making, right? They're statutorily required in 381-986 to award a license to a Black farmer. And that's Florida's version of equity, and I'll leave it at that. But at the same token, although there's only one license, there could be an opportunity where applicants who do apply may be in for a surprise by virtue of what happened last time, right? A lot of licensed applicants received their license via litigation settlement. So we'll see what happens. 2022 is sure to be an exciting year on that front.
Absolutely. I'm excited to stay tuned and see how Florida unfolds in 2022. I'd love to segue it over to Duree. Duree, I mean, you provide an essential function. Not only are you big on helping companies maintain a good image, but you also really help with crisis management. As a PR company, you get kind of called in the middle of the night when an emergency happens. So, what have you really seen over the last year be problematic for your clients or opportunities for future growth?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm a proud part of CLAB on the leadership team. And so it's always nice to kind of look back at the last year and kind of what we worked on. And one of the things that we did and that we worked on was we put together a panel where we had Ricardo from FDAX on talking about Delta 8. And obviously that was, a huge from a legal perspective, from a PR perspective, all over the US. It's not, obviously not just specific to Florida. So that is certainly an area that just this year has been a huge focus for us and our clients that are either on the legal side or producing the products or testing the products. And so, and obviously there's, kind of looking forward to 2022, there's a lot more coming with, all the other stuff that we know is coming. And, that did play, certainly Delta 8 and following what was going on at each state level. Is it legal? Is it not? What can we do? What can't we do? What states were doing what, and certainly advising and working with our clients. Certainly, we're not the legal experts, but we have to make sure that they're in, they need to make sure they're in compliance, and we need to make sure that, we're not falling into a situation where there's a crisis or, if we need to jump into something. But Ricardo was great from FDAX. I know they couldn't really touch much of Delta 8, and we had a lot of folks on the webinar about that. So I know there's a lot of opportunity kind of moving forward. We've got, Delta 9, Delta 10, THCO coming. So there's a lot kind of on 2022, but I did want to kind of put out there and talk for a second about Delta 8, just because I know on our end, it was so incredibly busy and trying to navigate what does it mean, what, who's interpreting what to mean what, and how do we kind of work around it. And then the other thing is, certainly just the consolidation and the opportunities with MSOs going into different markets. That certainly was and has been huge for us in kind of navigating that. There have been a lot of rebrands as well. So it's certainly in looking in reverse, kind of, and looking in the rearview mirror, 2021 was like Eric was saying, it was a long year, but in some ways it was a really fast year. It's kind of like that bittersweet when you look back, where it was, super fast, but super long in some ways. And they're just constantly shifting. And I think everybody on the panel would agree that 2022 looks like there's still going to be lots of, craziness. And I still continue to say that being in this industry, it feels like every year is like dog years. So it's like 7 in any other industry. So I don't think that's going to change, certainly in 2022. And, we're happy to be along for the ride and to help our clients.
Yes, I tuned in for the Delta 8 webinar that you did, and it was very, very educational. And I give you a lot. I have to give you a shout out because you take a different approach than a lot of other PR firms in the sense that your team really does understand the legal aspects, and that is so imperative. And you do such a service for your clients in the fact that you really guide them and don't steer them in the wrong direction. You have taken way more of a compliance and learning the legal side than I've seen from other PR companies. And I really do have to give you a shout out because the work you do is really impeccable in the industry for the industry that, with your experience level and whatnot. So big shout out to you guys for everything your team's doing over there. You guys are doing a great job. But as far as Delta 8, I would love to touch on Delta 8 for a second. Delta 8 has become a really hot topic throughout the United States. Our law firm gets calls all the time to do Delta 8 opinion letters. So for you, those of you who don't know, Delta 8 is a natural occurring cannabinoid within both marijuana and hemp. It doesn't, in natural flower, it does not exist in very large quantities, but through labs, they've been able to concentrate it. And it's being sold as Delta 8, and it's being sold as legal hemp products. Now, some states have taken a very strong opinion on Delta 8 and have explicitly banned it, or their interpretation of their laws, saying that defining hemp as total THC under 0.3% has caused it to be banned. But there's other additional cannabinoids that are coming out. We see Delta 10 THCO, THCV, THCP, there's HHC, and it's really, really interesting to see, you know, how people are approaching it. Recently, just in September, on September 15th, the DEA actually came out with a very, very short opinion opining on Delta 8. And they specifically said that so long as it is derived from hemp, it doesn't technically qualify as a controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act. However, what they didn't touch on is the Federal Analog Act. And I think that is extremely important for people to realize. Like, if people just read this DEA opinion and think Delta 8 is legal, there's more to the puzzle than that. There is a bigger analysis that needs to be had. So if your hemp company is looking to get into, you know, some of these derivative products, I highly, highly recommend that you work with a lawyer in your jurisdiction, just to make sure you understand, you know, the legalities, not only on a federal level, but in your state, and really understand how the feds might take a look at some of this stuff. I know, Peyton, we were talking just a little bit before the webinar, so I don't know if you want to weigh in at all on the Federal Analog Act.
I will definitely weigh in. So we've seen all types of stuff roll out. You've got D8, D10, HHC, and now you've got the, whatever you want to call it, ATHC, THCO. There's a few slangs for it. I think there's two major cases whenever you want to take an evaluation to these substances under the Federal Analog Act. You're going to want to take a look at US v. Forbes and US v. Washam. And essentially the issue when it comes down to THCO is that once it goes into your body, it is essentially just processed into Delta 9 THC, right? And the science behind THCO, it fits like a glove with the precedent in US Washam. So I really see THCO getting cut, not making the legality mark. You know, I obviously, my opinions around D8, D10, it's legal under my evaluation, but I'm having some issues with the THCO as far as it crossing the line under the Federal Analog Act. So that's my opinion. I'm no master. So that's just something though to definitely be keeping an eye out and taking a look at whenever you're getting into these new derivatives and things like that. You really need to understand the chemistry and the bodily processes behind it, because that's what's really going to come down and determine whether it's illegal or not. So I think too many people have taken the Farm Bill and just sort of said, if we can make it out of hemp, then it's legal. And that's not going to be the case in some instances, especially whenever you're producing something that's psychoactive, stronger than THC, you're going to get some pushback on that. So that's my take on THCO.
Definitely. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Federal Analog Act, basically it's looking at a substance that might technically not fit the definition of a controlled substance. So for instance, Delta 9 THC over 0.3%, it's considered a controlled substance. So the Analog Act is saying that if the chemical structure is substantially similar to the chemical structure of a controlled substance, that's either a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, it could be considered a controlled substance analog. Or if the effect is a stimulant, depressant, or hallucinogenic on the central nervous system, and it's substantially similar to another controlled substance, it also might be considered a controlled substance analog. So it really, like Peyton mentioned, it's really important to look at how not only these, compounds exist chemically, but also how they react with the body. And where I think it's really going to come down, like Peyton kind of inferred, is like looking at the potency. If the potency is almost equal to or greater than Delta 9 THC, I think we're going to see problems from regulators and some greater scrutiny just because of the psychoactive effects. But I do think this is going to be something to keep taking a look at in 2022. So yeah, keep an eye on that. But I won't bore anybody else with my chemistry. I've been nerding out on the chemistry side of things lately. It's very interesting.
And I will say also that in 1992, the Federal Analog Act was set aside as being unconstitutionally vague. And then in 2002, it was brought back and it was upheld, and is still being upheld today under certain circumstances, particularly when somebody knows that they're engaging in the production of a synthetic drug that is intended to mimic the effects of the original. My opinion, if Delta 8 is intentionally, maybe not intentionally, but is made and sold as weaker, than Delta 9, as Amanda was speaking about. And I think that you're really running into issues once you start producing actual psychedelic and sort of pushing psychological effects off of these derivatives. I think that, you're going to be in a whole mess of trouble. So keep an eye out.
Great. Well, pivoting back, Mo, I'd love to hear what you have to say on what's going on with the seed to sale tracking. We know that Florida had an emergency rule and that they were looking at trying to put forth some seed to sale tracking. Have they adopted a system within the state of Florida yet as far as seed to sale, and what else is going on a national level in the seed to sale tracking?
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. So in Florida, we're still in active RFP. They sent us an email, I think, earlier this week where we were selected as one of the finalists. So good indication that at least we're getting closer. I think their current timing has them announcing a winner either late December or early January. But as we all know, it's Florida, so that may slip a little bit. On the national front, I will tell you that it has been a more active. Oh, sorry. It has been a more active year across all states. This year, I think Florida makes it probably like the 10th or 11th RFP, and there's also been a couple of other RFIs in the process. So very active on the state front. We just won the contract in Connecticut. We're also working with Virginia. To Vijay's point earlier, like we're also looking at the Texas market. Alabama is starting to move in that direction as well. Also on the federal front, there's the MACE bill that's being proposed. So there's a lot of momentum moving in that direction. We're seeing more initiatives by the states on the executive level to create and drive the cannabis industry. Whereas, we've come from a place where it was ballot initiatives and there was a lot of grassroots activity from the industry trying to push for legalization. I think the social equity is also helping to bring more awareness. It's bringing more eyes onto the issue, and they're trying to level the playing field, which I feel is a good move across the board. I think some of the states are having challenges with how they're rolling it out. I don't know if you guys have been watching Illinois, but they rolled out the licenses. There's litigation. There's a lot of questions. So I think there's a lot of good intention by the states. I think how things are actually unfolding has become a lot more challenging. I also know, like in New Mexico, they have the micro licenses, but you still need $500,000 to play, even if it's a micro license. So there are some challenges. The intent is good, but like there's still some barriers to really kind of level the playing field. On the national level, I think a lot of what the federal government's challenge is you have varying degrees of regulation for both med and rec across the country. There isn't a clear-cut way for them to try to standardize some of these things. It opens up Pandora's box. Like, how do we standardize testing? Where does DOT come into this? What happens to the waste? Where one state may be okay with all types of extractions, right? Like the hydrocarbons just got introduced here, but other states have been doing them, right? Like, how do they weigh all these things? They don't have enough, I think, people in the know from the market that can guide them. I think that's one of their bigger challenges is the knowledge transfer and them beginning to really kind of wrap their arms around this on a federal level.
Hey, Mo,
Absolutely.
I had a quick question for you. I mean, in 2021, we had like a lot of M&A activity, not even just from the licenses perspective, but like for your industry, just the picks and shovels, right? The auxiliary companies. We're seeing a lot of activity on that side, whether it be like, POS or seed to sale or customer retention management. I'm sorry, Amanda, I gotta say my acronyms, but like CRM, customer retention management, ERP, enterprise resource planning. You got your e-commerce platforms, We saw Dutchy buy Leaf Logics. We saw Kerna buy MJ Freeway, and then they just bought 365 Cannabis. Are you seeing that on your side too, Mo? Like the consolidation of the auxiliary companies? And do you see that kind of continuing through next year? What's your forecast on that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so honestly, what we think is going to happen is just like on the licensee side, right? Like the MSOs are rolling up, they're figuring out which states to go into, and kudos. I liked your remark about California. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. That like the California market, it's so big. It's like, yeah, but it's oversaturated. The black market is still robust. Like price points and taxes are an issue. We really think that over the next couple of years, a lot of these companies are going to get rolled in together because everybody's looking more for a full stack solution. So on our government front, that's what we're engineering right now, is full stack solutions that cover the patient registry, the business licensing, surveillance, enforcement components, the seed to sale, analytics. We're getting more and more like requests from states to help them understand the data so they can make more informed decisions. Now we're going into real world evidence. Like our ultimate goal is the licensing and the registry feed into the seed to sale. The output of the seed to sale goes into the analytics tool. The data coming out of the analytics is then studied from a real world evidence to kind of make decisions. And the net result of all that is we move closer to being able to educate the prescribers on how to prescribe the products that are in the market, like coming up with some baseline dosing that like, you should ingest an edible that has this type of potency range, 10 milligrams 3 times a day, right? So you're getting closer to really being able to manage patients and their therapies. And I think that the recreational dollars out there are going to fuel a lot of what I feel like is what we need as an industry to kind of shore us up, right? So we've gotten ourselves here, rec is turning on in more and more states. That money is going to be needed to then fuel the medical that's going to help safeguard our future further downstream, right? Because at a certain point, the recreational markets turn into normal retail markets, right? And saturation and the laws of business really kind of kick in there. And then kind of like what's next. So we really see that a lot of our focus is like there's going to be consolidation. We're also looking at, do we build by partner when we're talking about different technologies? So we're building a 2.0. We're building this data. Well, we've built the data factory. So one of our goals is to help create this ontology or taxonomy to standardize how we collectively as an industry can like look at information about products and demographics and segmentation in a standardized way, right? Because like the naming conventions all over the place. What somebody claims is a 1 gram cartridge in another state may be interpreted as like, no, you're really at 75% potency. That's really a 750 milligram cartridge. So we've developed this data factory where we ingest data from not only our customers' systems, we pull from public sources, we buy from different assets, we purchase consumer data. So we have 50 billion transactions on the consumer data side. We have contracts where we receive 90 million prescription claims records every week in a HIPAA de-identified manner. Like all that kind of gets cooked into our pot of analytics through our data factory, and it goes through this like sanitization process to then give, whether it's the investor community or the medical community or a state that's asking like, how many dispensaries do we open up? How many more licenses do we allow? How much does the existing supply chain infrastructure support in terms of scalability? Are there nuances? Like, what are the tax implications? Like, we're getting all these types of like more technical and specific questions as, there's more money obviously from the rec taxes. There's more visibility on this whole market in general. And as you've seen from some of the valuations, right? Like Dutchy and Leaf Logics kind of kicked it off. The valuations and the funding for this industry is kind of getting pretty high up there, similar to kind of maybe what we saw in Canada. I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, where they were just like handing them money hand over fist. So we are definitely seeing the consolidation. We're expecting that in 3 years, there's a lot fewer players. Things have gotten rolled up and you're getting more to like one-stop solution. So if you do go to like a Spring Big, for example, they do the text message, they do the CRM, they do payments now, they do online ordering. I'm sure they're cooking up some level of analytics in the background. Like everybody's getting to the point where they do everything. I think, just speaking from personal experience, the seed to sale piece is always a lot harder. There's so much complexity. Everything is always a 911 if there's a problem. So I think people tend to stay out of that. I think, there's probably 70 plus POS providers across the country at this point. Anybody can get a good 100 customers or so if you have enough of the right people. Scaling across different states and being competitive with your feature sets and providing, as we scale with these MSOs, like their needs are changing from day to day. They are becoming more streamlined. The accounting and the cost component to all this is more and more important, which requires more and more technology, more controls. That's really the direction that we're going in, is coming up with a turnkey solution that allows from the mom and pop to the likes of a Cresco or an Acreage or a Curaleaf to be able to leverage our technology, whether it's native components, whether we partner with integrators. But that's really what we're seeing, right? The market's just going to look very different in 3 years from now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes,
I
I
was going to say,
completely-
let's hear from Curaleaf. I know, Stephanie, you've been dealing with some of the challenges as far as marketing and packaging, and with all the Mo, you point out some really good points. It's really, really hard on a state level when everything's so diverse. Stephanie, what are some of the challenges you see?
Yeah, so absolutely, especially when you are a multi-state and national brand, that your goal is to build a national brand, right? It's not to be known just in one state. It's to build the biggest presence across the country as you possibly can. We just acquired Trike out in the West Coast. And I agree. I think that there's a race to build more and more and more. And I think everything's going to be consolidated. I think I do have a background in pharmaceuticals, and just like I saw when I used to go to them for sponsorship of my television show, there were this many pharmaceutical companies and they just kept eating them, each one of them up, right? And the strong survive. So I think we're going to eventually see the same thing here. I think a lot of companies are trying to build and build and build, and then who knows, when it goes federal, there'll be those that stay and those that will sell out to a big pharma or a wine and spirits or that type of thing. And for marketing, which is my area, the challenges are, especially multi-state, is the differences from state to state. You try to come up with some streamlined ways of marketing or companies to work with, or just like Mo was saying, the one-stop shop, because if I have to go to 17 different people for all of my data, as opposed to one person where I can get everything at once, it's quicker, it's easier, and it's just a much more cohesive way of doing things. So that is the goal, as I think it is with the MMTCs, right? We want to be the one-stop shop too, whether it's a tincture, a vape, an edible, a brown, whatever that looks like. We want you to be able to come to us to get everything, because if you don't have that variety, you have a greater risk of somebody going somewhere else to get it. And maybe while they were there, they didn't want to go someplace else. So they just decided to make the whole purchase there rather than, and then not get to you. So that one-stop shop is extremely important. But again, when you are creating marketing plans across a nation and every single state has different rules, and what you can say one place you can here. Like we have packaging here in Florida. If it's an edible, it's white, period. White with one color for your logo. When you're trying to have some fun and excitement, in something and everything's just white, it's kind of difficult. And then with the new labeling, having to open up, taking receptacles out of their boxes so you can put the label on it, and then you have to put it back, which means more people are touching things, and it takes a lot longer. So some of these laws have created, a little bit of difficulties. And again, like we said, one of the main things is the different laws state to state and what you can do. It just makes challenging trying to build a national brand. It just makes it much more challenging.
Do you think that'll change if we are able to, become legal on a federal level?
I think so. I mean, I think if it's, you know, I think if the laws are similar, if they're not the same, or if it's federal on a legal level, and it's like now it's being guided by federal, so it's the same thing over, you know, throughout the whole country. I think at least for marketing purposes, sure, when you could build one major campaign for an entire brand, like, dare I say, a Nike or whatever, it's very difficult for us to do that because everything is different from state to state to state. I work with my regional counterparts throughout the country, and every time we're on a meeting, we can't do that here. Oh, we're going to do this here. We can't do that here. So everything is changing. And like we've brought up in the past, if I turn around tomorrow at this time, we could be having a completely different discussion because something changed.
Sounds like Mo can relate.
It's just, you know what it is? It's like, it's so, you know, we work with a lot of these different states, not only from like our state level, but with our customers. The temperament, the like social stigma status within a market is different. How like the regulators enforce against the licensee makes a huge difference. Like there's like so much inefficiency, and it just, it's a time suck for the licensees. It's a time suck for us. Like I can't, like, I don't want to disclose some of these things, but there's so much like infighting in some of these states that just it like wrecks everything. People don't realize it when they're like, oh, they just took forever. It's like, yeah, they've been arguing behind the scenes because of political power or who has more leverage, and in the process, we as the industry get run over and we hemorrhage cash while we're waiting on these responses and these actions. So it's just, it's challenging. I guess here's kind of what we're hopeful for, is that there gets to a point where we kind of have something similar to the Cole memo, and there's some overarching federal guidance that says, you know, as long as the state doesn't do these things and you give us this type of visibility into reporting, you're all good. We reserve all other rights back to the states. And there's some sort of mechanism to allow for reporting upwards to the feds. I think if they try to take like some sort of federal tracking system, God help us, like every state will turn into a mess. Like there will be so much inefficiency and like so many problems. Like it'll wreak havoc on us. You know, to look at an example, like look at Washington. They tried to implement leaf data. It's been a problem. And in that process, businesses have shut down because of that technology failure. These guys couldn't transact. They were literally like working month to month, and then technology derailed them for 3 months. That was it. Like hundreds upon hundreds of businesses got shut down. Like there are like real world like implications to some of these decisions that I don't think really get thought out, or they're just made in a vacuum, and we suffer with the outcome of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
To your point with just the stigma being different state to state, it's different city to city.
Yes.
You know, right? In the state of
Yep.
Florida, what you see on the west coast of Florida versus
That's right.
Miami is night and day. And if, at least for the education of it, if it was a combined effort and a group effort from everyone to educate the benefits and everything like that, it would be so much better than each one of us going out individually piecemeal, trying to educate and change that stigma. Because that's just the one thing that we're really focusing on, is changing the stigma for people to be educated to the point where this is, they realize this is a safe thing and it may be an option for them and their wellness. Let's forgetting about recreational for a minute, but let's talk about wellness, that it is a safe and viable option for them. If you would remove the stigma, they would consider it worse, where now they won't even consider it. But it's really, I travel the state and I see the difference when I attend something on the East Coast, especially Southeast, versus the West Coast, where they're open and the stigma is more, if there is stigma, it's more out in the open as opposed to behind the scenes. And I think if even on a federal level, if we could have the education component, being that this is legalized already in so many states, that we can at least do the education part, that would help to get rid of some of the stigma.
Yeah, I think education is key and pushing this movement forward. We've already seen a lot of stigmas being brought down, and I noticed, from anecdotally from my own personal life, people that were very opposed to it, grandparents and older people, and people that were really, really against it. They're coming around. They're like, okay, Amanda, I see what you're doing. And we need to hear more stories. We need to hear, and we need to hear, have more opportunity for education. I totally agree with you there. But I do want to kind of segue a little bit back to, when you are an MSO or even just a state operator, there's a ton of liability that can be associated. Like we've said, there's so many rules, there's so many regulations. You need to dot your I's, triple cross your T's. So a really important thing, besides having an amazing team of lawyers and marketing and PR and other professionals, is insurance. Insurance can really help in many different ways. So we have David Rahn. David, can you tell us a little bit like how insurance can help a multi-state operator or even just a cannabis operator in the space?
Yes, yeah, sure. A great thing to talk about, especially for multi-state operators and single-state operators as well, is to have a robust and comprehensive management, liability, risk management portfolio. So it's really dealing with all of the certain risks and lines that really kind of aren't part of the, personal injury or building damage sort of liabilities like your product or general liability. Those things are like employers' practices liability, directors and officers insurance, balance sheet protection, general partners liability, cyber insurance, crime and fidelity insurance. All of these lines of insurance really deal with the errors and omissions that you might come through on day-to-day work. And then also, it really shows that if you have all of these different insurance policies and such a comprehensive risk management portfolio, you're really going to attract yourself not only the investment money and capital that you're looking for either your multi-state operation or your single state operation, but you're also going to attract qualified management to run these companies and to run these entities that are making the pivot coming over from big ag or big tech or finance, who are looking to sit on these boards and become directors and officers. They want to make sure that the company is up to snuff and ship shape as far as the risk management is concerned.
Absolutely. Okay, absolutely. Sorry, everybody. Dave is at the airport, so we did not time our panel well as far as with him being at the airport. But we do really, really appreciate you participating and making sure and making this a priority this evening. But I think that's a great point, right? Like a lot of people are like, oh, we can't afford insurance. We're a startup. But realistically, it really can help you attract top level management and actually attract investors. So insurance is definitely not something to be overlooked, even for a startup. It also, there's so many different types of insurance that you can get. And a lot of people also think, well, there isn't insurance in the cannabis industry. There definitely is. Dave, and his team can definitely, at CannGen Insurance Services, they can definitely help you out with all your insurance needs. But I think it's a very good point that you make as far as not only protecting your liability, but making you more attractive as this industry grows, and also to the point that as it consolidates, it is becoming popular. And I do agree with Stephanie, we are going to see more consolidation similar to what we saw in Big Pharma once it's more allowed on a federal level. And once we see, things coming more online in other states as well. We do have about 10 minutes left. We have one question that came in. If anybody else has any questions, now's your time to put them in the chat. But while we wait for some more questions, I'll turn it over to you guys. Do you guys have any last minute thoughts or anything you'd like to chime in on that we've talked about today?
I mean, I kind of want to talk about, this consolidation trend. And, I think we all touched on it, and we all kind of foresaw that consolidation is going to be key, and it has been key for this year, for 2021. And, I think everyone agrees that 2022, it's going to get even more so. And I think, one of the things that's going to be a catalyst to that is just the availability of financing. We've seen a lot of MSOs that have really secured relatively low rates, high when we're talking about outside of cannabis, but within cannabis, relatively low. GTI got 7% for about 220 million. Ascend got like almost a little less than 10% for like 210 million. And we're seeing all these rates kind of indicate that there's like an active progression towards like debt pricing. And, Ascend and GTI, they're on the top of the chain, but you're really not going to have that affordability if you're a smaller operator, because one, you don't have that luxury of profit levels, you don't have a lot of revenue to show for, and you don't have assets to be secured. But it is a positive trend that larger businesses who do have that cushion to kind of withstand these short-term swings in demand, that they would, essentially provide some lenders with some comfort, and that theoretically be afforded those lower rates. So I think that's going to be one thing to look out for, to see how that trend continues in 2022 and kind of just fuel the more consolidation in the market. And I mean, this year was huge because cannabis also survived COVID, right? It thrived, actually. It was deemed essential. So we're now all essential. So that's a big move for cannabis.
I would jump in on I always kind of laugh in a way where during COVID, here we have in Florida, we're deemed essential, right? And, you have to have a card, and we're dealing with MMTCs, so it's really not accessible to everybody, but yet it was deemed essential. And so it's almost, kind of, I mean, it's a good thing in terms of what that means that is coming, but, we were able to capitalize on that for some clients in the state of Florida. It's just, it's just kind of odd that we're dealing with so many roadblocks, which we've all talked about here today. Certainly when Stephanie was saying, the roadblocks over and over again with branding and packaging, and, certainly we've experienced on events and what we can say and all of that. And so, I think it all kind of weaves into each other, the consolidation, certainly the branding with the consolidation, what that looks like, and the experience in the store, and making sure that we have offerings here as things get consolidated. And then going back to even, just the finances that Vijay was talking about, it's all just so intertwined, and all of these things individually, and PR kind of making the announcements and helping announce the rebranding and working on the branding as well too. But I think, like Vijay said, it's going to continue. Things are pointing in the right direction, even as Eric is saying in the state of Florida, but they all are connected, which it's so, in some way, it's really interesting that it's all affecting each other. And so we can pull out these different components of it, but they really are all intertwined. And, to me, it makes it fascinating, but, I still go back to being able to pitch during COVID that, we had a client that was deemed essential, and yet, you have to have a card from a doctor to be able to purchase. So I do think that means, it's a good thing where things are going, certainly in Florida, but it does make things, like Stephanie was saying, on the education side. That is all what, we're all still educating and educating patients, doctors, people in general. And so I think so much of what we're all doing, including what Mo was saying, is continuing to educate. And I think that's kind of a commonality kind of across all that we're saying, and we're preparing for what's to come, but certainly everything is intertwined. And, that's what keeps, I think, all of us going, is who knows what to expect at this point.
And to your point, Duree, the fact that we were deemed essential, and then as we came out of this to a certain degree, then they took away telemedicine, right? Which still people who were afraid to travel and were immunocompromised didn't want to have to go to the doctor or a doctor's office, and they decided not to renew their license or re-up, whatever, because they didn't feel comfortable going out to a doctor's, but were essential, but you're going to remove telemedicine. So it just keeps going around and round and round.
Yeah,
I
and
think
so
that's a
hopefully
great
we'll
point.
keep moving in the right direction, but that is a very good point. I mean, I think between that and how the discussion may trend on the different types of THC, what may be allowed, where and how, it's all kind of evolving. And I think the more we can base it on data and research and information and people that are continuing to do more of that, I think the better. But good point, Steph.
Absolutely. I'm sure you'll be advocating next year to bringing back the telemedicine on behalf
Yeah,
of
we already are.
Florida.
It's the only bill that's matching right now, and if it
Has it
doesn't
been
come out by
filed?
March, no one's gonna have it for like a year and a half. So we'll.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I think you have to renew your card is it 7 or 9 months? Like it's not like annually, it's even like shorter than that. So
Yep.
it's really kind of a hassle for
I think
our medical
it's
patients.
more than a shot than anything, but we'll see. We'll update you guys on the next month on that one.
Yeah, the card is once a year. Your certification is twice a year, every 210 days. So you have to at least go to the doctor twice a year, at least to get it renewed. And the other thing, as you brought up, I think reciprocity is really important. And that's something that we want to educate, especially in Florida with all the seasonal and the snowbirds. They shouldn't, a lot of them don't realize and how do I get my license here and what are the requirements to let them know, especially from state to state when you're in multi-states, to have that information available and a place for them to go to find out what the laws are state to state and how you can travel and still be legally getting your cannabis if it's not. If it's
and the rate of increase for patients has gone down to almost half of what it was before this was allowed now, if you look at the numbers.
Yep.
So I think that's a lot of people that weren't able to get in, couldn't get an appointment, sadly aren't involved anymore. Hopefully they'll be back. Maybe they're better, but it is interesting.
So I'd like to touch on this. I get to do consulting with a nationwide telemedicine company doing medical marijuana cards, and we run into massive issues. Even here in Florida, we've got areas in North Florida with a, close to 2-month wait. And it's just, if I don't call you 2 months, let's say I'm a patient, depending on this for epilepsy, I can't go 2 days without this. I'm definitely not going 2 weeks without my medication. So we're sending people back to the black market with these long waits. It's not a huge problem we see in South Florida because we have so many clinics, but throughout North Florida, I've been dealing with a consistent problem of consistent calls of my physician. Every physician in my town has a month wait. So
call and write your legislators. So yeah, and let's talk, or come up to Tallahassee on the 1st.
Yeah, but that's also, I think it's also, if you notice, their doctors are not increasing, right? The doctors who are certifying are not increasing. So when you look at 650,000 patients versus 2,700 doctors who probably, that number is probably way higher than it actually is, the ones that are actually active versus have a license. So when you think of that, I mean, I just think that it became a lot of work for the doctors, especially not talking about what I call clinics that only do medical the marijuana certifications, the doctors who incorporate it into their practice. It was a lot of time. Patients in this are very needy because they're desperate, because they've been looking for answers. They need information, they need education, they need handholding, and doctors are either don't have the time to do that because of all their other patients, or don't have the ability to do it because they don't have the correct education for it and don't have the time for it. And so I just think a lot of doctors in practice, regular practice, felt like it was just a lot more money. A lot more trouble or a lot more work than they anticipated it to be. And then the ones that went in it to make the money realized, not really doing that. And there's a lot of work, so I'll leave it to somebody else.
All very good points. So, I mean, I definitely think we need to talk with our legislatures and, really push these issues forward here in the state of Florida. I could talk all night about this, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. We do have one question, which I would love to address. We had a question from David from the audience who wrote in. He said, what are the ethical implications for a Florida lawyer to give advice on obtaining a marijuana license, any type, because of the conflict between state and federal laws? Can a lawyer ethically give advice on this topic? Yes, David, we can. While I am licensed under the state of Florida, I am also qualified as an attorney to give, to interpret the federal laws as well. And I mean, our answer is basically that. I mean, we would go into much more detail, but at a federal level, I mean, anybody that is engaging in, you know, the unauthorized sale of a federally illegal substance is doing something that is federally illegal. So, you know, you do have to keep that in mind. Now states, we've seen that the federal government is not necessarily coming in and prosecuting, you know, people who are operating with a license under their state's guidelines, but that doesn't mean that doesn't change in the future, you know, under different, you know, different, you know, a different president or other regulator. But does anybody else have anything to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I agree with your assessment, Amanda. You know, we are allowed and permitted to do that. Best practices would be for David, who asked that question, is to ensure you have the appropriate clauses within your engagement letter that stipulates that, you know, this is a federally illegal substance and federal law prohibits the use and possession and distribution. And then, you know, you as a client understand that the landscape of cannabis changes rapidly. And, you know, there is a conflict between state and federal law. And, you know, just like you mentioned, Amanda, you know, right now governments aren't prosecuting, but if that were to change, you would also include in the disclosure that, you know, your right to attorney-client privilege or work product privilege, you know, may be argued by the government if it decides to prosecute, that it does not apply because, you know, you were aiding and abetting. So it really just comes down to disclosing comprehensively to your client within the engagement letter. That would be best practice to mitigate any type of liability. And of course, we're dealing with cannabis, so you can't mitigate everything. All you can do, well, you can't reduce everything or eliminate everything. You can only mitigate. So,
yeah, disclosure is key. Any opinion letter we write, you know, of course, both in the engagement, it's important to have that language, but also in any legal opinion letter we write. And you know, it is a risky space for lawyers as well, because at the end of the day, you know, if the wrong regulator came in, we could be seen as aiding and abetting a federal enterprise, an illegal enterprise. So, I mean, even lawyers and the picks in trouble people that are, you know, helping the cannabis companies are taking on some risk.
I'm sure if the regular Law and Order was still on, I'm sure there would be an episode involving a cannabis doctor being sued or something like that.
Gosh, I hope not. Well, I just want to thank everybody for their time. This was a great panel. I look forward to seeing what the year ahead brings. Tune in next month. Vijay is going to have a really, really great panel on the Black farmer here in Florida, on the license that's being given out. We appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
And
Happy holidays, everybody.
Come to the annual conference. It's coming up.
February 5th and 6th. Bye, guys.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.